Hi everyone, welcome back to Online Darts. We're still in Zoom, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, we've got PDC Chief Exec Matt Poor. Matt, it's been a while. First of all, how are you? Because I can imagine these last few months have arguably been the toughest of your professional career.
They have, yeah. I think that's a good way of summing it up, Phill. Probably since, do you know what, organising behind closed doors events or staging behind closed doors events is not that difficult because you take so many components out of a normal event. There's no crowd, very little sponsor activity, so there's no issues with tickets or anything like that. And then essentially they're just darts matches with cameras pointed at them, so that bit becomes quite easy, but the planning is really difficult, and particularly the travel issues with things like the World Cup, the World Championship, and then the logistical issues with the amount of players we had at Q School and stuff like that. I would agree with you. It has been, I can't think of a tougher period for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's coming on for a year, that fateful night in Liverpool, as I keep saying, that we all said in the media room, well, I probably won't see you next week, but we'll see you in a few weeks. And nearly a year on, we're still there. I don't think any of us could quite believe it. No,
you're right. And I think the best thing to do at the moment is to look forward, because I think looking back on this last year is always going to be difficult. And I would hope it's unique. And I would hope it's a path that none of us ever have to take again. And I think now the fact that we have got some sort of roadmap back to normality, as I sit here on the upper balcony of the Winter Gardens looking, but this is what we all want, isn't it? This image behind me, is what we as darts fans crave to have back. And it looks like, fingers crossed, we will have it again this year.
Yeah, we'll touch on the Winter Gardens in a minute, but I just want to go back to the Worlds, because we spoke pre-Worlds and you said it would be like a sledgehammer to the sport if Boris did a U-turn, and after night one, he did. What did that feel like? Because obviously we were there on night one, and it was amazing. Limited crowd, but they were all in there. They enjoyed it, and it was one of the most COVID secure places you could ever have been. And just for one night, must have been for you and the team gut wrenching. The effort
it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. It was a huge amount of work that had gone into it, and we were so grateful for the support of the fans who'd gone out and bought tickets and trusted us to keep them safe in that environment. And I think you called it right. Nobody went into that environment with the aim of jeopardizing anybody else's safety or not following the rules or anything like that. And those few hundred people were respectful, and they enjoyed it, and they got involved as far as you can in that kind of environment, because clearly the darts atmosphere is built around the intensity of a full arena. So when you've got a 2/3, 3/4 empty arena, whatever it is, it's never going to get red hot. But they still got behind it, and they enjoyed the action. And I think they felt they were maybe part of something special that night, because clearly on that night, they knew and we knew that they were going to be the only ones who were allowed in. So it was a sort of moment in time. But yeah, it was brutal to have to then take it all out again and put the banners up and stuff like that. But I think we did it as well as we could do. I think the walkway down the middle looked good. I think the big banners looked good, and people got used to it. It was something that we've become accustomed to over recent months.
Yeah, and more from a financial point of view. I remember speaking to Barry, and he said we lost 4 million on the Worlds. That can't happen too often, can it? I know you said the pot's always been there, but that's a huge hit for one tournament.
It is, yeah. And don't forget that, events like Players' Championship events and European Tour events are underpinned by the profit that is made from events like the World Championship and the Premier League. Those tour events generate almost no revenue whatsoever, but we commit to putting on, if we can, 30 a year to keep the players going, to give them a living. We don't have to do those events. We could just say, here's the World Championship, here's the Premier League, here's the World Matchplay, the Grand Slam, blah, 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 get on with it. But we want to be a professional tour and a professional circuit. So you have to have those flagship events to pay for the day-to-day bread and butter stuff for the players, and particularly the players who don't always get the chance to play on TV and earn decent money. So it's not it's a pot that we can still reach into, but it's not a bottomless pot.
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously, World Championship changed everything. A new world number one, a new world champion in Gavin Price. Good times for the sport that is so competitive.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, the fact that we didn't know who was going to win the event, it was great. As much as when you've got that marquee flagship player who can play to a better standard than everybody else, as much as he's a fantastic flag waver for the sport, and it doesn't matter if that's Phill Taylor, Michael van Gerwen, Peter Wright, Gerwyn Price, Gary Anderson, whoever that is, doesn't really matter. But the excitement factor of having 5 or 6 different potential winners is huge, and particularly with the different environment of having no crowd, people take to that in different ways. Some prefer it, some don't like it. And Gerwyn's actually been quite vocal saying he didn't like it, but he's obviously got his head around it, and he was fantastic, and he's a great world champion for us.
Yeah, one thing that came out of the World Championships, it was the gamesmanship angle raised its head quite in a big way, because a lot of people got involved from the media, the Sky team, and certainly Gary Anderson. Is that something that you're looking at the DRA with, to put something in place to stop things like this happening, or are you just going to let it flow and go with it?
It depends what it is, doesn't it? I mean, Gary's of a certain mentality, and he doesn't like it if anybody on stage isn't behaving 100% the way that he is, and that's his right. He's a great player. He's won almost everything the sport's got to offer, and his opinion is always valid. But maybe modern sport is a bit different. Maybe I'm not suggesting anybody should be cheating or doing anything to deliberately put their opponent off, but maybe you have to have a different mentality to be able to deal with every eventuality, and the strength of players, players who have the strength to shrug that off. And Gary actually has got that strength, as was shown, because he won the match, but he obviously doesn't like it, and then he makes his opinion known, which is fine, absolutely fine, no issue with that whatsoever. But he's not going to retire just because of it. Like, he wins and then says, "Oh, I'm done, I'm walking away." You're not going to retire, Gary. Don't worry, you'll retire one day and go and fish on them lakes, and that'd be brilliant. You'll love it. But you're not going to retire because someone played slow against you. So
Yeah. No.
A bit of needle doesn't really hurt. Clearly, if somebody's cheating, we'll clamp down on that. But ultimately, it's just part of live sport, isn't it?
It adds to the drama, like you say. It's UFC and boxing are built on trash talking in press conferences.
Yeah. And we don't really want to get to that level, and we don't have that same head-to-head mentality. Like if you took Fury Joshua, for example, if they fight each other no times once or twice in their careers, that would be it. But player A in darts might play player B in darts 15 times a year. So you can't really, unless there's something exceptional, you can't really build that rivalry in that respect, because if it's just one beating one, then one beating the other and stuff, then it doesn't become like that. If you look at tennis with, say, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic and Murray, that's more like, people talk about that more as a dynasty, of those 4 players being the best tennis players, the most successful, great ambassadors, blah, blah, blah. They don't necessarily, and they look at the head-to-head record, of course, but they don't necessarily worry so much if one beats the other, because they're going to be playing each other again in a couple of weeks. And if you look at maybe, our most successful players of recent times, Michael, Gary, Peter, Gerwyn, Rob, whoever, they're all going to be beating each other. Over, because they're going to play each other so regularly. So you can't really sort of play on that individual needle so much. But obviously you do get rivalries that build up within that, because why would they all like each other? They're there to take money out of each other's pockets.
Yeah. Moving on there, the Masters, first time 24 players, even though behind closed doors, a huge success, and you must be happy with the way that all played out.
Yeah, really pleased. It was the decision to, it wasn't an event we had to put extra players in. Nobody was clamouring for it, saying, "Oh, the Masters has got to be 24, it'd be so much better." But actually, it was extra content, and it gave more players. We felt the strength in depth was there to justify it, and that was borne out by Mervyn and Johnny getting to the final. Fantastic from the pair of them. And I think it certainly didn't harm the tournament in any way, shape or form. No one could say it was worse because it was 24 instead of 16. And I think ultimately, as I say, because of those 2 guys getting to the final, it proved that it was a warranted decision.
Yeah, and as you guys, Barry told us about the director's WhatsApp chat as it started pinging in the evening. When did it become apparent that, hang on a minute, we could have the final that 2 players aren't in the Premier League, and are we going to commit to it?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of after the afternoon session, really, and we discussed various scenarios. And we said, well, look, we've put players in the Premier League because they've won TV tournaments. So I think there was only one of the semi-finalists had won. My memory's rubbish, but was it Peter or somebody was in the semis who was in the other 3 maybe James was the other one.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, no, if they're going to win on TV, then they deserve it, because there wasn't an outstanding other candidate. Had there been, we may have done that after the World Championship. There were plenty of people who you had half a case for.
Yeah.
And, but there wasn't anybody who you could conclusively say, this guy deserved it. He's done enough over the year. He's got to be in it. He's playing to the level. He's winning enough matches. He's entertaining, blah, blah, blah. So it's a case of, no, okay, well, if Johnny or Mervyn win it, fair play. They deserve it. They'll be in it.
And for Welsh darts, it's a huge thing at the moment. It's like real hot. Everyone used to talk about Stoke, but Wales as a country now is absolutely blossoming.
I know. It's amazing, isn't it? Because our world champion and world number one is now the second best player in Wales.
Yeah.
I mean, like Johnny Clayton in Bolton, unbelievable. I mean, I was watching some of the streams following the Dart Connect and Twitter and everything. It's like Clayton wins. Fair play to the. I mean, I remember saying to Johnny in Coventry last year, "Are you going to actually take this seriously and go full time?" He's like, "Well, I'll see how I go. If I fancy it, if I win anything, blah blah blah." And it's like, well, he's that good being part time.
Yeah,
surely he's got to push the button. Surely.
Yeah, you would think so. And then from there, obviously, Q School, huge changes, huge logistical problems because the amount of people. But you must have been over the moon how that 10-day period went on both sides.
Yeah, very pleased, and fair play to everybody at PDC Europe as well for the way that they staged that event in Niederhausen as well. It's a good venue over there. It's a for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a hotel with a conference hall, and it's almost in the middle of nowhere. So it's really good to do a bubble at because everybody's in, they're tested, and there's nowhere to go. And they had a slightly different scenario over there to what we had here, in that their restaurants and bars could stay open. Yeah. So food service was a lot easier over there than it was here in Milton Keynes, where it was pretty much room service only or supermarket only for 10 days, which isn't easy for people. But we'd made the decision that we had to go to 2 stages. We felt it was the right thing to do, that certain players deserve some form of status above maybe just someone who's paying to give it a go for the first time, and we don't want to ever cut off the route for the person who's paying to give it a go for the first time. But perhaps if you've been a pro or you've done well on the challenge or development tours, that you deserve a little leg up, not an easy shoe-in, but a little leg up. So it fitted in with what we had to do in terms of reducing the numbers of people on site. The stage 1A and stage 1B, we don't know if that's something that will stay forever, because it worked okay. It made it a lot more expensive. The event for players, some people were there in Milton Keynes for 10 days, which is not, it's not an insignificant amount of money they've got to spend. In non-COVID times, you may not need to do stage 1A and 1B. You might do, but you might just do it all stage 1 and then have a stage 2 for players who qualify. But pleased overall with how it went out, and some great stories. Obviously Barney coming out of Europe, Danny Baggish. So no, really, really good.
Yeah, touching on Barney, obviously he retired, and he wasn't. You could see mentally he wasn't in a good place, but it looks like that time away has really invigorated him, because he looks completely different to the man we saw for the last 2 years of his first.
Yeah. I don't know if I've not spoke to Raymond about this, but I don't know if he really, really saw it as retirement or whether he saw it as a sabbatical and a step back. He's not a player who nobody enjoys losing, but he's not a player who is particularly comfortable with not winning. Yeah. And he wasn't winning, was he? For a player who's won so much in his career, he wasn't reaching the levels that he would aspire to reach. So I think he found that difficult, and I think the travelling and the pressure and stuff like that was clearly sitting heavy on his shoulders. So maybe that break and perhaps that realisation during 2020, when there was nothing going on, that he had something that he actually wanted as opposed to resented. Resented might be too hard a word, but you get the idea. Maybe that hit home. And fair play to him for going to Q School. And Phill Taylor said it. I don't think, Phill said he just wouldn't suit. It just wouldn't be for him, And for someone of Raymond's stature to turn up at Q School against players who have paid online to be there, and could throw a 40 average or 105 average. Fair play to Raymond for actually, having the strength of character to turn up there and pretty much blow the field out of sight. Although he didn't win any of the first stage days, he was relatively comfortable. What he did in the first 2 days got him there, and then it's good to see him back. It'd be good for Dutch darts and good for the PDC.
Yeah, the one negative that we saw about Q School on social media was the count back rule. Is that something that you'll maybe look at and assess?
I'm not. I spoke about this on a podcast the other day. I'm not sure we necessarily see it as a negative. What the way we saw it was that we didn't. You have to be very careful when you've got a round with buys in it.
Yeah.
Because if you're a player and you've been given a buy, okay, you're through to the next round, but you've also been denied the opportunity to improve your leg difference.
Yeah.
If you ask Rod Harrington, he would say to you, he would rather play in that preliminary round and win 6-0 and have a +6 leg advantage on his tally rather than be given a bye straight to the second round because of his confidence in his own ability.
Yeah.
If you haven't got that confidence in your own ability, you probably shouldn't be there. So I get the point that people were saying it wasn't fair because that first round and the legs that were won in that round didn't count. But ultimately, that was done in a way to ensure that everybody was playing off a level playing field. And I think, that is whether you agree with it or disagree with it, you can't argue that by having everybody counting from the same position, it's fair.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was just probably the only negative that came up on social media across Q School. Everyone else really, really liked it. And another one.
Fair enough. Opinions are good. We want opinions.
And we were asked to ask you next year, at potential, could we see some sort of stream or televised part to Q School next year?
Maybe. It's not, look, again, we want it to be a level playing field. These guys, by definition, guys and girls, these players are not professional. By definition, they are striving to get into the professional game. It's okay for us to ask professional players to play on a stream board because they're professional and they should be able to cope with that. But Q School is very important that it's even, level, fair, whatever you want to call it. And it's very important that everybody plays in the same conditions because they're striving to get this ticket. There's also a question of demand. There might be demand from a core of fans, but there has to be a wider commercial demand in order to make streaming financially viable. You know that from some of the streaming work that you've done yourself. So it's a balancing act, and it might do at some point, but it's not something that we're dead saying, we've got to go and get Q School streamed. But it might move forward to that place at some point.
Now, to some better news. Obviously, Boris announced the roadmap to normality. Fingers crossed. And as soon as that come out, all eyes were looking to that very famous venue behind. Are you confident that we will see a capacity crowd under normal circumstances in July?
Yeah, as I sit here talking to you on the 3rd of March, I am, because that's what we've been told. 21st of June, no social distancing measures. We're yet to see the detail and we're yet to see how things will unfold over the next 3 to 4 months. But we have to have something to strive for. And the way our calendar falls, the Premier League being and the World Cup being the only sort of things before then, the match play is set up perfectly to be our big return to normality. We've sold over 10,000 tickets to people who wanted to go in 2020. They've had the opportunity to obtain refunds. Only about 5% did. So people have got that appetite to go back to Blackpool and see the World Matchplay, and we want to be able to deliver that for them in 4.5 months' time.
Obviously, you touched on the calendar and everything like that. With this roadmap, I'm guessing you've got it all mapped out, but are you just holding on to it in case something changes? Because a lot of people...
Yeah. I mean, that's my life, Phill. It's a spreadsheet. It's called PDC calendar _V for version, and normally it gets to about 3 for the year. This year, it's like got so many numbers after it. This year's one, it's ridiculous. But it's something we're working on. We're looking at the World Cup, in June. Does that make sense? Will everyone be able to travel there? Will we be able to have a crowd? Maybe not. Second half of the Premier League. But we are hoping that from Blackpool onwards, we can start, putting the normal TV events in the normal places, in the normal venues, normal times, get the European tour back up and running. World Series might be a challenge this year again because of travel restrictions. But we're hoping that second half of the year will resemble as close to normality as possible.
Touching on the Premier League there, obviously you had to make the decision to put the first 9 behind closed doors. Was that arguably one of the toughest decisions you've had to make because of commercially and everything like that?
It wasn't a difficult decision because it was a forced upon us decision. It was an unfortunate decision to have to make, and commercially, yeah, it's another killer. You know, it's a lot of money in gate receipts, a lot of money, and it goes back to what I was saying at the start of the interview. That money's used then to fund Pro Tour, Challenge Tour, Development Tour, any other events that we do. You know, so to miss out on a lot of that was difficult. The biggest challenge with the Premier League is that it's played across 7 different countries. Because obviously here in the UK, the 4 nations have their own rights over COVID or rule making, whatever it is. So with that, Ireland, Germany, and the Netherlands, even if we were allowed events in one country, wouldn't necessarily mean we were in another. So it's tricky with the Premier League, and it's going to be tough to get any sort of crowd in this year. But maybe a little bit towards the end, you never know.
That was next on my list. Would you hold off that back end of it until after July if you could get crowds, or will it be before the match play?
Yeah, it'll be before the match. We haven't got time. You know, if we are normal after the match play, we'll be playing constantly. And we won't have time. We've also got broadcast contracts, sponsor contracts. We've got agreements with the players. So no, we won't delay the Premier League to the second half of the year. I think the fans like it in the spring as well. It's a good lead up to the sort of main bulk of the year when our events are. And I think if we were to just put it in the second half of the year just for the sake of it, it might lose some of its impact.
So the likelihood is the whole Premier League will be behind closed doors.
You would say not too far away from that. Yeah.
Obviously, as well, with a lot changed, the UK Open this year, no riders qualifiers again for obvious reasons. A lot of people are asking about the Grand Slam, and I'm guessing it's going to be something similar, that it's probably going to be an all PDC field this year because there's been no other darts to give picks away from.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's obviously a bit of a sort of reshaping of the landscape in the amateur darts world at the moment, and we'll wait to see how that transpires. A lot of these new organisations seem to have good ideas, but haven't had the opportunity to put them into practice yet because of COVID. So there is no obvious BDO replacement, although I hear they're still going. So I don't know, but the picture isn't clear whether it's BDO, WDF, MAD, UKDA, Tri-Nations, whoever it is. There's people trying to claim that ground in the amateur darts world, but nobody can do that at the moment. So until we see somebody do that and put together something that's credible enough to warrant any sort of qualifiers, then we're not going to move on that. We can provide our own qualifiers if we need to. That's not a problem.
Yeah, you touched on the BDO still being alive, although it's not obviously PDC relevant, it's still darts relevant. That Friday night, as it all went down on social media, did that, obviously one of the negatives, paint the sport in such a bad light, the way that all went down?
It's not great, is it? I mean, it's no one ever likes to see internal politics and things like that. But what I would say is that I think if we'd have been having this conversation 10 years ago, it might have done more damage to darts than it did happening now. I think with respect to the BDO, their positioning in the sport is not what it was. And I'm not sure that many people, perhaps outside the immediate darts inner circle, noticed.
Fair one. And going back to the UK Open, on the horizon this weekend, all in one room in Milton Keynes, like the old days at the Reebok. And a lot of fans excited about this.
Yeah, it's a bigger space, the Marshall Arena. It's a big space. And I was asked the other day why it was all in one room. And I was like, well, because there's one big room there, so it's clearly not going to have fans, so we don't really need to put it in different rooms, and there won't be audio and stuff like that across each board, but the way that you'll see the ITV presentation in the room, sort of that you'll be able to see what's happening around, and it'll look good. I'm excited for it, and I couldn't tell you who's going to win it.
Well, I don't think anyone can. It's literally a complete lottery this year, but it's a good way to get the ranked televised titles underway. Go into a tournament not having a clue who's going to win.
Totally, yeah, and that format as well. You've got to be on it, haven't you? You haven't got time to warm up and get going, because best of 11 in those first few rounds, you'll be dumped out, and there'll be plenty of new players with not a lot of respect for reputation. So any of the big names who are in it, before it gets the best of 19, are going to have to watch out.
Again, another one that come up on the UK Open, obviously COVID dependent and all that, but will the amateur aspect still be in next year's?
Yeah. I mean, we still talk to Rileys all the time. We're we want them to be back up and open again. They're a great destination for amateur dart players and semi-professional dart players. You know, we want to see more people playing darts outside the PDC circuit more regularly, because that's where the next generation of PDC players will come from. So, you know, we'd very much look to work with Riley's next year and get their qualifiers back in at Minehead.
And again, just a couple odds and sods here just to tidy up, Matt, obviously, if you don't mind. A lot of people touching on the prize money situation and what you said there about these TV tournaments paying for the other smaller tournaments. Are we potentially going to have to see a cut in some prize money across the board over the next 18 months to take this, or can the pot take the hit?
No, we're okay. We're okay. You know, as long as the current position of, you know, sort of July onwards is upheld, then we'll be okay. You know, it's not, we're not pushing the red button yet.
And no, I think that's understandable. And then obviously you touched on the World Series. It's not looking likely because of it. Those gaps that are normally World Series, will we still see tournaments, or will they just be dead weeks, or are you going to fill them somehow?
No, I think I think possibly not. If we can't do what we want to do in early June, that might not be anything else. But I think if we can't go to Australia and New Zealand in August, then we would look to, you know, have some form of activity during that period to fill that gap, because, you know, we're going to have to fit a lot of what would have originally been in the first half of the year into the second half of the year. So that might give us that opportunity to do so, if we're unable to go to Australia and New Zealand. And you know, the main factor revolving around that will be the 14-day quarantine. You know, if that's compulsory, then that's not going to be practical for us. I think they do have pretty decent sort of percentage filled crowds over there at the moment. And we've sold some tickets, although we're not obviously selling anything at the moment because there's no guarantee we're going. But I wouldn't 100% rule that one out yet, but it's probably looking that way.
Yeah, no, definitely, Matt. Absolute pleasure. I know you're a busy man, so thanks for taking time out on my darts, mate. We massively appreciate it as always, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks again.